I didn't plan to do a video about video game acquisitions and mergers, but then we got this story, so I decided that now's the time, so here we are. I haven't been inside the inner circle of a video game company now for well over a year. This is going to be filled with hot takes, but let's see if we can't get some cool facts in there at the same time. Let's start with the companies that are sort of on the market. And when I say sort of on the market, I don't necessarily mean that they're looking for a buyer. It just means that they are publicly traded or otherwise large enough to be something that would be newsworthy if they were acquired. We'll go through each of those, talk about how big they are. First of all is Activision Blizzard. Already supposed to be acquired by Microsoft, but the deal hasn't closed. Things can always change. Activision Blizzard, the largest independent one by market cap, lots of franchises, brings a lot of video game to whoever buys them. So did Microsoft buy Activision at a fire sale because of all of the cultural toxicity at the company? Honestly, probably yes. They probably felt like they could acquire a company like Activision, bring in their own processes to at least whitewash over all of the problems while picking them up on sale. Microsoft's one of the few companies probably that's big enough to absorb a company like Activision that's as big as it is with as many problems as it has from a cultural perspective and have some confidence in their ability to absorb that. Activision Blizzard has a market cap of about $60 billion. That's a big thing to buy, to chew on. Next biggest, EA, the one that prompted this video. EA sitting at about $37 billion. EA has some strong franchises in its sports titles, got a good contender in shooters, and then has a variety of other strong IPs across the board, like The Sims or the BioWare games. It is first or second in a lot of categories. So if you're looking to become a major player in the video game space, Electronic Arts is going to give you a very broad portfolio to come in right away to do that. So we know that EA has been in talks with a bunch of different companies to either merge or be acquired. I think they're looking for something where EA would be a relatively big player in the resulting acquisition, but I don't know, I could be wrong. When I was at EA, it kind of always felt that EA was always for sale, and I think that's probably true. EA is largely institutionally held, so if you're an institution, a hedge fund or a mutual fund or a pension fund, you're always looking to make a buck. So if you can get someone to buy you for more than you're currently trading at, that's one way to do it. Was this a story? Did the NBC Universal merger get closer than any of the other conversations? Probably, given the way that the story broke, but it always felt like EA was on the for sale list when I was there to some degree or other. Going down in market cap, we get to Take-Two. We drop pretty far from $37 billion to about $13.5 billion. So we'll just go quickly through these, but I think it's worth sort of seeing each of them one by one and talking about them. $13.5 billion for Take-Two. Capcom is, if you convert its 961 billion yen into American dollars, it's about $7.5 billion. Ubisoft, converting euro into American dollars again, it's about $6.2 billion. Square Enix, converting again, $5.93 billion. I might argue that one reason why potentially Square might have divested itself of its Western IPs might be because it's looking for acquisition by a Japanese company. Maybe it's trying to get bought by Sony and it wanted to really focus down on its central Japanese IPs. Maybe. Sega, still pretty big. It's sitting at about $5 billion. And then you have two things that I think are worth talking about, but are not publicly traded, which are Epic, was estimated in 2021 to be worth about $29 billion. And then the other is Valve, which was estimated in 2019 at being worth about $10 billion. I'm not entirely sure that the balance of those two makes perfect sense. It's hard to figure out valuations of privately held companies, but certainly both Epic and Valve are companies that would bring something strong to the table from a potential acquirer, from certain buyers at least. And then one that's worth at least mentioning, as we're in meme stock territory, is GameStop. The hedge funds were trying to drive this thing out of business by shorting it to death, but then Reddit decided it was going to save this thing and keep pumping that stock and short squeeze those hedge funds. It's worth about $7 billion. It's not a profitable company at the moment, but it's interesting, and it is something different than what you get from any of the other things on this list. You're getting a retail presence, so it's potentially even something that one of the larger companies on this list might be interested in having. Probably not. It's probably not worth its current valuation because it's totally in meme stock territory, but it's worth at least mentioning. With that, you have a list of not all of the potential video game companies of any size to be bought, but a nice, interesting cross-section. The massive size discrepancy between all of these potential acquisition targets really means that the kind of buyers that are available for them, as well as the way that an acquisition would have to be structured, are radically different. If you are a $180 billion company, you can buy a $5 billion company with a relatively straightforward form of acquisition. On the other hand, if you're buying a $37 billion company, that starts to look a lot more like a merger and requires a lot more cooperation between the potential company that's being acquired. Let's talk about some of the potential buyers. So starting with NBC Universal, and I'm starting there because they are the ones that were in talks with EA. NBC Universal only has a market cap of $188 billion. That means that for them to acquire EA, either they're leveraging themselves very heavily, or it's more of a merger. I think when you read the articles, you can see that it was actually headed towards something that was more of a merger. There was even talk that potentially the combined company would have been headed by Andrew Wilson. So that looks more like what happened with Disney and Pixar, where NBC Universal is going out to find something that is going to change their business and turn them into something different. So they would come out of this merger being a relatively transformed company. So a merger is where the two companies are coming in not necessarily as equals, but at least as peers. So EA is about a fifth the size of Comcast, of NBC Universal. So they're not just being bought for cash. There is a negotiation, and everyone's kind of going in willingly at the executive level. It's very easy to stop a merger, for either party to stop a merger, because the amount of money on either side is such that you can't overcome any kind of resistance. The reason why EA might be interested in this kind of merger is that a lot of the executives would be able to move up into a now much larger corporation. The example from the articles is Andrew Wilson now becomes CEO of a greater than $200 billion company, as opposed to being CEO of a $35 billion company. So that makes it interesting potentially on both sides. So is an NBC Universal EA merger dead? I mean, nothing's ever dead. It's certainly possible that there is still negotiating going on behind the scenes, or the situation for one stock or the other stock or both stocks changes enough that the deal becomes appetizing again. I don't think NBC Universal would be looking to buy any of the other people on the list, mainly because it seems like they're looking for something big and transformative. If they were to buy a small company, likely it would just get gobbled up and digested by the rest of the organization. If what Comcast is looking for is something transformative, they're not going to get that from a Sega or from a Square Enix, or even from an Ubisoft. Well, of course, you can't say big games acquisition without talking about Microsoft. Microsoft worth almost $2 trillion, $1.9 trillion. So that puts anything they acquire in a totally different light. Even Activision Blizzard, where they're buying it for $60 billion, it's less than 10%, way less than 10% of their overall market cap. So they're able to absorb really big acquisitions without too much disruption. So is Microsoft still in the market for even more video game companies? I mean, the short answer is probably yes. The long answer is no, probably not in the short term. They need to finish digesting Bethesda. They need to start the process of digesting Activision Blizzard. And presumably, at some point, there is a point at which antitrust regulators get activated and a further acquisition of video game development gets resisted at a regulatory level. But that remains to be seen. While Microsoft is probably interested in picking up some more things, they're probably not going to do it anytime soon. That being said, if the Activision Blizzard deal falls apart, then they might go on a really rapid buying spree. Rumor was that Microsoft was trying to buy Bethesda well before they did. And when that fell apart at the time, that was the same year that Microsoft bought up a bunch of little studios all at once. So if Activision Blizzard, this huge acquisition, was to fall apart, they potentially have $60 billion burning a hole in their pocket, and they might find themselves picking up an Ubisoft or a Sega or something like that, just to scratch that itch. Microsoft's primary competition in the console space is, of course, Sony. Sony is worth a lot less money than Microsoft. If we convert from yen to US dollars, Sony is worth about $113 billion, as opposed to Microsoft's $1.9 trillion. So it's less than 1/10 the size. That means that it has a lot less muscle to go out and acquire big things. So Sony's probably not able to buy an EA because it's actually smaller than NBC Universal. So unless it's looking to merge with EA, it's probably not going to buy something of that size. That being said, $113 billion still means it probably can scrape together the money to buy an Ubisoft. Culturally, I don't expect that Sony is looking for a merger. If they're looking to acquire things, they're looking to acquire things that they can digest. I mentioned this in the first part of this video. I do think that it is possible that Square Enix might be maneuvering itself in order to be acquired by Sony. Look out for that. I think that's a possibility. So it's interesting to talk about Sony because Sony is both the major competitor to Microsoft, but then also a competitor with another company that's all about collecting IPs and controlling large swaths of the entertainment space, which is, of course, Disney. Disney's probably not as big as you think it is, worth about $186 billion. Similar in size to NBC Universal, actually. Disney could certainly broker a deal if they wanted to buy a company like EA. In a lot of ways, EA makes a lot of sense for Disney to acquire because Disney controls Star Wars, EA's been doing a lot of Star Wars games, but also the thing that people often forget about is that Disney owns ESPN. Strongest aspect of EA is sports development. Merging ESPN and EA Sports into one entity is potentially really powerful. But unlike a company like NBC Universal, which might be looking to shake things up and bring in new leadership, Disney's not really looking to do that at all. So if they were to bring in EA, it's going to be very much as a junior partner in the relationship, which EA executives might be a little resistant to. So while I actually think that in a lot of ways, the most logical acquirer of a company like EA is Disney, I don't know that it's actually going to happen. As well, Disney's been in and out of video games over the years. I'm not entirely sure that it actually has a ton of interest in getting back into that space at the moment. That being said, buying a big publisher is a way to do it in a more successful all-in kind of way. So if Disney was looking to do that, rather than buying something like EA, where they might have a lot of difficulty digesting it, they might be more invested in buying someone like Square Enix or Ubisoft. Square, they already have the relationship going for things like Kingdom Hearts. So my hot take on Disney is actually I don't think they're really in the market. They might be sniffing around right now, but my bet is once they get down to the negotiating table that none of these deals are going to go through. I think they are focused on their core businesses right now. And while they are willing to license their IPs to video game makers, I don't think they're going to be buying anyone anytime soon. Amazon has been making big strides into trying to get into streaming, get into content production. They, I think, probably are looking at a company like Netflix and seeing that being the platform is great until it isn't great. And Amazon definitely looking to try to diversify itself. They are dabbling in game development right now, and I think for them to actually be in the market to buy somebody, they would have to pretty much be willing to give up on their internal development. I don't think they're there quite yet. But worth more than $1 trillion, Amazon has the resources to buy anyone they want if they decide to do it. I just personally don't think that they're right now thinking in that way and looking to buy anyone. Conversely, Facebook is hard at work trying to make the metaverse a thing, spending billions of dollars already on the metaverse, buying a video game developer in order to supplement that effort could potentially make a lot of sense for them. They're worth $528 billion, which means that they have the resources to buy anybody on this list. If they were going to buy someone, and ideally they'd probably want an MMO developer, but on the list we've discussed, the one that probably makes the most sense for them is Ubisoft, because Ubisoft brings the open world exploration stuff from the Assassin's Creeds and the Watch Dogs that might be able to be relatively easily transferred into their metaverse development. Are they looking to supplement their internal metaverse development? I think they might be, because they definitely aren't having a lot of success with that development, at least not yet. The largest company on this list by quite a bit is Apple. Maybe this is just my own bias. Apple's $2.25 trillion, so that's a big company. In my interactions with Apple in the past, they haven't seemed to be particularly interested in game development at all. That being said, they now are pushing pretty hard on Apple TV, getting some good shows there. So they're leaning more into content creation, like Amazon, like Microsoft, like all of these companies. So with that newfound desire to have a focus on content creation, maybe there's a new appetite for Apple to pick something up. If they're looking to supplement streaming specifically, then some of these private companies like Epic or Valve start to make a lot more sense, where you're able to pick up something with an existing platform that's working on streaming, that has an existing customer base that you potentially could plug in to your existing offering. Similarly, Amazon, for exactly the same reasons, could be interested in an Epic or a Valve. You get a game platform with EA as well, but you're having to buy the entire corporation as part of that deal. So it depends on what you're looking for. If you're looking for content and a platform, EA is a great buy. If you're just looking for a platform, Valve makes a ton of sense. If you're looking for a couple of landmark titles, Fortnite, and a platform and an engine, then that's what you get with Epic, which is probably why Epic is estimated to be worth more than Valve. A big player that people often forget about is, of course, Tencent. So Tencent is worth about 420 billion American dollars. So bigger than anybody on this list that isn't Facebook, Apple, or Microsoft. They have been buying up tons of little things and buying positions in a lot of things. They own part of Epic already. I don't know if there would be regulatory resistance to a Chinese company buying a big video game developer. There doesn't seem to be a lot of regulatory resistance to anything in the United States at the moment, but maybe because relationships between the United States and China seem a lot shakier than they have been. But Tencent definitely has both the resources and the desire to pick up Western media holdings. So are they going to buy something on this list? I don't know, but they could certainly pick up something smaller, like a Square Enix or a Sega or a Capcom or a Ubisoft. And any of those companies, not American companies, so maybe less regulatory resistance to a Chinese acquisition. I don't know, but it would certainly definitely up their presence in the West to buy that. Two little wild cards here at the end. Netflix is worth about $82 billion. Netflix is in a bit of trouble right now because they've been losing subscribers, and it would make sense for Netflix to do something to diversify itself and make it more competitive with some of the other players on this list, like Disney. I don't know that they remotely would be able to shake enough money loose to make an acquisition of any size. So maybe for Netflix, the only possibility would be a merger. And if you're going to talk merger, you're probably talking EA or maybe Take-Two. They're the only ones that are really big enough. I mean, an EA-Netflix merger is interesting. Netflix correctly has identified that they need to be a company that makes content, not just the owner of the streaming platform. But they may have moved too late. And so it's interesting to see if Netflix is going to be able to survive for the next 10 years. If they do, maybe they do it by picking up a big player in the video game space, maybe do video game streaming. That will remain to be seen. What I would say on Netflix is that Netflix probably wants to acquire one of these companies, but whether they can or not is a totally different story. And then the one that probably everyone who looked at my admittedly kind of clickbaity thumbnail is wondering about is well, what about Elon Musk? So Elon Musk is potentially spending $44 billion to buy Twitter. We'll see if that deal actually goes through or not, but that's what's reported. He was able to secure funding to do that when the Twitter board was being resistant. So he could buy basically anybody on this list except for Activision, which is already bought anyway, in theory. Now, there are some caveats on that. Presumably, when Elon was going to get financing to buy Twitter, he went to the financiers and he presented something that said, I can make Twitter make way more money. If he was to do the same thing with EA, I think that's a lot more complicated of a case to make. With Twitter, I don't know what case he made, but he made something that said they are leaving a ton of money on the table. There's more money to be made here. When you look at EA, I think that case is a lot harder to be made. If anything, the accusation you can make at most of the video game companies on this list is they're making too much money. They're gouging every last cent out of the players. Maybe you can't secure financing to buy a company like EA, but you don't have to go very far down this list before you're getting into companies that you can buy for less than $10 billion. And then you're not even needing to get the financing. But why would Elon Musk even want to buy a video game company? Well, okay, a couple of reasons. If he is the bastion of absolute free speech that he says that he is, then one place that he could exercise that unregulated free speech would be to move into a media company, into the media space, and to very much push the narrative he wants to push through the interactive medium. The other possibility is simply just because he wants to. Elon is a huge fan of Mass Effect. If he wanted to, he could probably pop BioWare and Mass Effect loose from EA for way less than $1 billion if he just wanted to own the next Mass Effect and be in control of that development. He could even probably pop the IP loose and give it to Casey at Humanoid Studios, buy Humanoid Studios, and for a few $100 million be in control of the next Mass Effect. Will he do that? I doubt it, but he certainly has the resources to be a player in this space if he so desired. And then the last thing that's worth talking about is that any two of the big video game players on the list could potentially merge with each other, either because they feel that they are more successful or more powerful together, or because they do it defensively. If you don't want to be bought by Netflix, then if you are Sega and you are Capcom and you stick yourself together, you go from being 5 billion and 7 billion to being 12 billion, you become a lot harder to acquire. So that's one final thing that is worth being on the lookout for, is as there are fewer and fewer players, some of the remaining independent publishers might glue themselves together to become players in their own right. Those are the kind of the pieces on the board, but let's talk about what happens after the merger or after the acquisition. Because of course, there's lots of things to be worried about. The short answer to that is it's complicated, because it really depends on who the buyer is and who's being bought. But the long answer is, I think I can summarize it this way. If two likes are glued together, so two video game companies merge, or one of the big console manufacturers buys a game maker, then usually what happens is there's some degree of consolidation that occurs. If you glue Activision and EA together, to use a made-up example, you probably don't continue making both Battlefield and Call of Duty. You probably collapse down to one of those games and get rid of the other. Similarly, Microsoft is going to have similar things where as they accumulate more and more companies, they are going to start to see that there is duplication and overlap. The number of games potentially goes down, at least in the medium and long term. In the short term, probably not too much happens. But in the medium and long term, yeah, you probably end up getting some degree of squeezing and cost control. Additionally, culture starts to infect the process, either intentionally, as will probably be the case with Microsoft acquiring Activision, where they will intentionally go and impose their culture upon Activision in an effort to fix some of Activision's problems. Or even in cases where that is not the case, the culture of the larger corporation starts to seep through the cracks and over time will have an impact upon the people down at the very bottom of the organization. That's the other thing. So one, some degree of consolidation and cost cutting and controls likely going to happen. If Disney was to buy EA, well, do they need Mass Effect when they have Star Wars? Things potentially change. Cultural impacts as well. Does EA want there to be M-rated games with romances like a Dragon Age? It may not, it might, it's hard to say. The short answer that isn't simply it depends is that it will have an impact. Ultimately, the more acquisition that we have, the less diversity of development there is, the less games there is, the more monopolistic potentially the business practices can become. One potential positive that maybe is just me wishful thinking is as this consolidation happens and you start to get fewer and fewer players that are bigger and bigger, it might open up some more space in the middle and the bottom of the top for new AA and low AAA developers to arise. Now, the middle is very unstable, and that is maybe just wishful thinking, because what you could just end up with is the situation that we now have with movies to a large degree, which is, yes, there are lots of movies being made, but what gets to be in theaters is very restricted. Maybe it ends up with more games, more players in the medium, in the middle, and the bottom. My worry, to counteract my hope, would be that actually what you get is just more players in the bottom and the middle disappears completely. Usually, acquisitions and consolidation are bad for consumers in the long term. In the short term, maybe it's great because maybe you get a Star Wars game from BioWare, or maybe suddenly your game that you really love gets access to China and is able to have a much bigger budget. But in the long term, companies tend to optimize and squeeze and do the minimum amount. So usually it's bad. So is Elon Musk going to buy Ubisoft? I mean, probably not. But, you know, if he's watching this video, maybe you should. If you watch this video just because of my admittedly kind of clickbaity Elon Musk picture in the thumbnail, know that that there is super thanks turned on if you just want to throw some money my way. That would be great. Special thanks to my members. They provide the resources that this channel needs to keep running. If you're interested in becoming a member, there's a link down below. If you made it through to the end and you enjoyed this video, give it a thumbs up because that will help spread it to more people and increase its reach. I am curious to see if putting Elon Musk's head on the thumbnail will get it exposed to a lot more people. What companies did I forget to talk about? Let me know down in the comments. Who would you like to see buy who? Or do you want no more acquisitions? Let me know about that in the comments as well. I will see you again soon. Thank you.